Hey, Virtual Reinhardt here. Wanted to walk you through how to define a class to make objects from, how to make a new file and define properties, data, and a constructor and methods that an object of a new type can run. So remember, that's what we're doing, is we're creating a new type. If you need a person object for your program, you need a dog object or a book object. You define what that type is and what data that it holds, how to make them, and then what things it can do once it's made. So I want to walk you through that process with two classes so that you can make your own. And here we are. Right now I have a program. When I run it, it really doesn't do anything at all. I have two additional files here. The dog class has been fully defined. We'll get to that in a minute. And then I have a person class that I'm going to build in a second. To start a new type, you would just click the add file. And if I wanted to make a class to define and create book objects, you call it book, singular, and then .java. Okay. And then right in there, you simply, to start it out, you say public class, and then it has to match the name of the file before the .java, and then curly brackets, and you go from there with its instance data, its constructors, and its methods. But that is all. That is all you need to do to define your own class, or define your own objects or class definitions, is just that. But let's go to person, and that's essentially what I have here. This is a class definition for a person object. So the first thing you decide as a programmer is, what data did you want to include inside of this particular class definition, or what data should each object have inside of it. And if I'm going to want name, age, and phone number as listed here, you just pick the correct data type to hold that type of information. So the name would be a string, or the string would be a name. The name instance variable would be a string. The age could be a double, I suppose, but we'll keep it an int. And the phone number, because of the dashes and things, we'll keep it as a string and give each a descriptive name. So that is the data that we're going to have for each object of this type, those three. And I could have much more. Okay? Notice you do not give them a value at this point. That happens inside of the constructor. And here's how you write a constructor. So backing up a second, the constructor you've seen before, it is the piece of code, the command, the method that creates an object of that type. So to write that method, you simply say public, and then you give the class name. So this is a person class, so you just say person. And then inside the parentheses, you list all of the data that you would like to be passed in when you make that object. So I'm going to need a string to give a value to the name variable. So I'm just going to call it n to keep it straight. And then I need an int for the age, and I'll give it a there, and commas separating each of these parameters. And then I need another string for the phone number, and I'm just going to call it PHNUM. All right, now I'm set. All the constructor does is initiates or copies those parameter values into the instance values, okay, into the data. So I'm going to say name is assigned or gets its value from the n parameter. The age data comes from the a parameter, and the phone number gets its data and from the parameter phnum. Okay. Now this is a little bit confusing at first, but once we run it, it will make some sense. Before we actually go construct a person object, because we're ready to do that, amazingly enough, generally all of your instance variables have a modifier before the type that says it's private. We'll get to why later, but for now, whenever you define what data that class is going to make all of those data pieces private. All right, let's go to our program that we are going to use person objects. We needed a program to manage people, so we created a person class. So first we're going to create our first person object, and it should look mostly familiar, but this is the new part, and the great part is that we've created our own type called person. Rather than int, rather than double, rather than string, we have a person object. Give it any name we want. I'll call it P1. And then just like every other object, new is going to be the command that's going to create an object. And you simply say, what constructor do you want to run? And it popped up for me, as you can see, but we just needed to know what information to pass it in what order. So we needed to know, because we wrote it, that I need a string for the name. So I'm just going to call it, give it a name that is a string, give it an age that is an int, and give it a phone number that is also a string. Okay, and I am done. I just created a person object, and if I run it, all sorts of fun and exciting things will happen. Wrong. Actually, nothing happens. All that happened was I created the person object, okay, but nothing has been displayed to the screen, and I'm going to fix that next. But we don't see anything happening, but in the computer's memory, that object P1 is stored with all of those data individually. So I can reference P1, and inside of that P1 will be all of that data. And that's exactly what I'm going to do in a print method. So back to my person class. I'm going to go underneath my constructor and add a method or something for this to do. And I'm going to go through the process that you've seen before. Now, void means this won't return a value. This is going to be a method that's simply going to display information to the screen. That's why I'm going to call it print. And all I'm going to do is take a couple of system.out.printlns and put in labels to all my variables like so. And so I'll change the names. This is age. And phone number. So again, this is not the place where you create an object. This is the place that describes what an object can do. In this case, print all of its data. And so each of those are the instance variables that will display to the screen when that object calls the print method. So I just gave it an ability. I gave any give it any person object the ability to display its information. Back to my program, and now I can call my p1.print method that I wrote in the person class. And now when I run it, all of that person's data is displayed with neat little labels next to them, as you can see down below, right there. Okay, and I can do that for as many times as I want. I can create, I have this just commented out, I have another person object right there, okay, and I can print all of that person object's data just like so. And and I can keep going with it. I can keep adding new people and then more abilities and more interesting things to happen. In fact, that's what I did with my dog class, which we'll look at in a minute. So that is the creating of an object right here, constructing right here on 12. And the reason that works is the person class. I made the person class to make person objects. A person object is these three pieces of information, which could be more, will be more, a definition for how to construct them, and the ability to display that to the screen. So we will eventually have more methods than just print. Wanted to give you a look at one more class that we talked about in class today, and that's this one, the dog class. Same idea, public class dog. That's how the top of the file, and then you say, what 4 pieces of information do I want in this class? I got breed, size, age, and color, each with the right data type. And then I have a constructor. Each constructor or each parameter initiates the instance variable. Instance variable. Each parameter is just like my person class, and then I have a print method. And if I go to my main class, I've already created those objects. There's my D1, okay, or one object, and I printed it. I constructed it with 4 pieces of data: the breed as a string, the size as a string, the age as a string, and the color as, or the age as an int and the color as a string. And hit run. And there we are, right here, okay? So this is your job. You need to create your own class, okay? Something, and give it its instance data, something like book or car, okay? Something singular. What instance data are you gonna have? What constructor, one constructor, and at least one method. And if I look in my dog class, I also have this could be a method as well. Something that returns a string rather than a void method, returns a bark string, and I can call that here like so. And you might have noticed I had another one too that actually lets you determine how many times you wanted a dog to bark based on a loop. So I took num times, an integer, as a parameter inside of the bark method, and I have a blank string, and my loop goes that many times and adds rough to that string and returns it. So that is why when I run this program, my D1 will bark 5 times because of I called this method bark that returned a string, and that 5 determined how many times rough was added into the string that returned it. So good luck with it. Check in with me if you have any questions at all.